problematic. In which case, you should say, look, I think it's great that we're in a non-growth mode in the United States, and that we're going into this austerity which is going to check growth. And I think Cameron's dead right to do what he's doing. And what's happening in China is really, really dangerous when you look at the way in which they're covering themselves with highways and you know, and automobile cultures, and they've even got gated communities and golf courses and all kinds of stuff. I mean, this is crazy stuff. Environmentally, it's very seriously defective. So you could kind of say the Chinese model is the worst from the standpoint of, you know, the long-term capacity, whereas the US European model is maybe better. But the problem is the US and European model is not geared to actually using resources to develop human capacities and powers. It's simply geared to assembling as much wealth as possible in a very, very narrow group of the population who exercise overwhelming political power. So here we have these two models, and we have to think of something radically different. And this means that we have to start thinking about what is going to replace and displace capitalism. What kind of world could we live in that was not committed to 3% compound accumulation of wealth forever and increasing concentration of that wealth forever? What kind of world could we create that would externalize all those internal, you know, would internalize all those externalities that exist out there right now? This says that actually we need another kind of project, another way of thinking. And the big trouble is, you know, I work in universities and I don't find many people thinking about it. They want to teach neoliberal ethics. And you say, that's a contradiction in terms. I see all these great, all these great conferences coming up which are going to solve global problems by actually anti-poverty initiatives. And I keep saying, you're in the wrong group. You should join an anti-wealth movement. Because you can't solve the problem of global poverty without solving the problem of global wealth. But there's this fiction, and I've been listening to it since I was a kid almost. We are going to solve global poverty. You know, and you see all the rhetoric around MIT, we're going to solve the world's problems, you know. Well, get with it. Come on, let's do it. Let's set up the anti-capitalist organization and start to think about the dynamics of what kind of society we can create that does not rely upon 3% compound growth, but does pay very careful attention to the development of human capacities and powers. Because growth and development are not the same thing. Development of human capacities and powers, there's infinite possibilities. Growth, there's not. And if we're coming towards this inflection point in the growth syndrome, then we should pay much more attention to human capacities and powers. And we can't do that all the time. The class structure is what it is, and all the time that class is absorbing even more wealth unto itself. All the time that class is trying to reconfigure the institutions of society to make absolutely sure there is no opposition to what it is they want to do and how they want to do it. There's a great line in Shakespeare. It kind of says, well, you know, the fault, dear Brutus, does not lie in our stars. It lies in ourselves that we're underlings. So you have a choice as to what kind of world you want to live in, you know. Do you want to live in a plutocratic world where they call all the shots and they decide everything? And, you know, if you're a bit lucky, you can get a few crumbs from the rich folks' table. If not, you're going to go join that number of people who are going to be part of the externality of what capital is about. You want that kind of world, or you want a more egalitarian world, which is more like what Americans apparently do want, which is a society in which income is much more evenly distributed, but also opportunities and capacities and powers are being paid much more close attention to. So my argument in Enigma is well, let's look at the situation, let's try to explain it, and let's look at the short run, what's going on in the short run, but let us also think about a long-term project and how to take short-term politics and short-term political movements and short-term political issues and turn them into long-term objectives. And this is, if you like, going to be a long process. And one of the things I tried to do in Enigma is to lay out what I called a co-revolutionary movement whereby social change could occur, and to start trying to think about how these things might happen. So one of the good suggestions I have, I think, for MIT, since you want to solve the problems of the world, is to develop a corpus of people who are actually committed to the idea of creating an alternative kind of society. Not technological solutions, political and social solutions. And join, if you like, in a movement that is going to be anti the Party of Wall Street, anti-capitalist, and try to define better what that might mean. I mean, I'm trying in my own work to do it, but, you know, I'm just one sort of lone professor who nobody listens to, you know. Well, it's not true, you listen to me, so it's... But this is the dynamic that has to be set in motion. And universities are places to try to do something of it. But universities have essentially become institutions of kind of just neoliberal collaborationism. And we have to change that. And that's our job to do it. So that's your mission. Anyway, so let me leave it there because we will have some discussion. Thanks very much. Okay, we have time for questions and discussion. Who wants to kick off? Anybody? Oh, yeah.
A comment and a question. First of all, thank you for mentioning the building dedication. Not everybody here will know that the building dedication, which is taking place right now, right up the street, next to the Stata Center, in all those tents, I guess, is of the David Koch Center for Integrative Cancer Research. Yeah. And for those who also don't know, that's the Koch, yes, of the billionaire Koch brothers who are funding the assault on public employees in Wisconsin, a graduate of MIT, PhD in chemistry, I believe, et cetera, et cetera. You can look into all the rest. So it's not, you don't have to go to Wisconsin, it's just up the street. My question is, there's something I think you skipped over in your analysis that I'm interested in asking you to talk about, and it connects up to your mentioning of Germany. When you talked about capital, or private companies wanting to externalize, you jumped to the public sector, the state, presumably also wanting to do that. And it was a jump that I think was missing some analysis, because private companies want to externalize doesn't mean at all that the state would necessarily have some innate impetus to need to do that. And that would be the politics of some liberal politics would espouse the notion that, in fact, the state should be providing health care for everybody, and in fact, that's going to be better for private corporations. Look at Canada, for example. So if you could talk a little bit about the jump you made from the externalization that goes on for capital and the politics of externalization to the state. And when you look at Germany, apparently, one of the reasons why Germany didn't have so much unemployment for such a long period of time is that because the politics of the state was to keep people employed, even if, with subsidies. And so, so the argument would be, well, there's a progressive model for some form of hybrid social democratic capital.
Yeah, the European version has been. I mean, you can internalize the cost two ways. One is by unions gaining contract healthcare, all those kinds of things. That's one way you can get the costs internalized by capital. The other way is to do it via the state and then tax capital. So capital pays either way. So one of the things that, that happens, of course, is that people, the anti-tax brigade, you know, is very strongly being mobilized to force the state to get out of social provision. And that's what, you know, Stockman was talking about, that we have this strategy to get rid of all of these social expenditures. But that then depends upon capital having power vis-a-vis the state. And one of the things that happened with the assault on union power is that whereas in the 1960s and 1970s and even into the middle of the 70s in this country, union power was still very significant politically. Union density now is below 10% in the United States. And so the unions don't have the power they once had, and so the politicians don't have to listen to them so much anymore. And you see this very tangibly in local politics too. I mean, when I first went to Baltimore in 1969, Bethlehem Steel was employing about 37,000 people. By the time you get to 1985 or something like that, it's employing, I don't know, 7,000 people producing the same amount of steel. And now, of course, it's gone entirely. Politically, when we wanted to do something in Baltimore in the early 1970s, you went to the Steelworkers Union and started talking to them, and if they would help you, you would, you know, big things could happen. You can't go to them anymore. So there's nobody, you know, the unions have lost that position through this assault on their power and the dismantling of that. And of course, part of what neoliberalization was about was to find means to actually dismantle most oppositional forms of power. And that was done in a variety of ways, which we can get into. But what you're really talking about is what's the relationship between capital and the state. By the way, I think in the case of the Germans, they have this law that you can't fire people, they have to go on short time. So it wasn't the state was subsidizing them. People they were working, I don't know, 30-hour weeks or something like that and only getting paid, but you didn't fire people. But that's German law. And of course, you know, in this country, what was interesting was when this country went for a stimulus of various kinds, the Germans said they didn't need a stimulus because it was already incorporated into these mechanisms that were there, that social, you know. In Germany, you don't have to go through all of the, or even in Britain, actually, you don't have to go through all of this stuff as shall we extend the unemployment benefit for another 2 months or 6 months. You don't have to go through that because it's structured in a different kind of way. But really the issue here is what's the relationship between state power and corporate power. And I think it's undeniable, you know, in this country, as Mark Twain actually said, we have the best Congress money can buy. And I think that's, you know, even more the case now than it was when